event here before. So you're all very friendly with the feedback, which is great. So we're going to go straight into the afternoon session, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Peter Bellershit. He received his PhD from the University of Kentucky in 1986, specializing in forage management and utilization, minoring in ruminant nutrition. He served the forage industry as the Oregon State University Forage Extension Specialist in the forage seed industry and within forage-related national and international organizations. Peter strives to build bridges between producers, consumers, and researchers. So he's in good company today, across a wide variety of scientific disciplines, while advocating for ruminant animal agricultural's role in food systems and the essential role of animal source foods in the human diet. So I'm delighted to introduce Peter as chair of this next session. Thanks, Peter. Thanks.
Howdy, everybody. Okay, I know I'm different culture, but let's get a little group participation going after lunch. Howdy, everybody. Much better. We'll work on it. Great. It is a pleasure and an honor to be part of this wonderful program. For those of you who don't know who I am, and there's really no reason for you to know who I am, I sometimes go by the moniker of Don Pedro, the sod father of the Ruminati. You can find me all over social media in addition to professional activities. So with that introduction of myself, there's only one other thing I'd like to say before I get to introduce the first speaker. And that is that in 2007, I was a 51-year-old, balding, obese, pre-diabetic. Today, I'm just balding. And this comes as the result of a lifestyle intervention. And I encourage people to learn more about this going forward. But as it says out front, it's something to the effect of, once you have hope, anything's possible. And so I want us to have a feeling of hope as a result of this wonderful event today and tomorrow. So the first speaker today in the afternoon session, by the way, housekeeping, we won't do Q&A during the presentations. There will be opportunity for that afterwards. And I think that's the only thing I needed to announce, but I'll be corrected and that'll be fine. So again, first speaker, Pablo Manzano. We need more people who cross disciplines. And Pablo seems to have made a career out of reaching across multiple disciplines, started in rangeland ecology, but now working in global north, global south, across a range of scientific disciplines. His title is Ecological Aspects of Livestock Agriculture. He's from the Basque Center for Climate Change in Spain and the University of Helsinki in Finland. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, everybody. So I would like to start talking. We have been talking about diets in the morning. I would like to start talking about ecology, because livestock actually grazes on ecosystems. And this is an important issue that has to do a lot with explaining bad things that are told about livestock that are actually not so bad. The first thing I wanted to touch upon is the role of large wild animals, and mainly this implies large herbivores in ecosystems. They are fundamental, and they have been fundamental for the last, at least the last 12 million years, maybe a little longer, and they have shaped the ecosystems that we see today. And this is why they have also a big role in climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. And they are shaping some ecosystems that maybe when you think about herbivores, you're thinking about prairies, you're thinking about steppes. But actually, if we ask someone called Bond, which you may think of a secret agent, there are photos of him, and I'm sorry to disappoint you. He's a vegetation ecologist from South Africa, but he has formulated a theory, or actually has collected a lot of data on the world not being a green place, but rather a brown or black place. brown for the feces of the herbivores, black for the role of fire. He has also compiled recently in this 2019 book all the evidence on that. It's a short book, about 200 pages, very easy to read, very interesting, where basically he takes the base on Whitaker's climate envelopes of the 70s. That was the first vegetation ecologist that defined an ecosystem uncertainty in some ecosystems. What does that mean? Well, it means that, for example, savannas, it's not clear, tropical savannas, it's not clear whether they are a forest or they are a grassland. And well, Whitaker first and then Bond expanded it into this map. And I am sure many of you are surprised to see that when we are talking about open ecosystems, we are not exclusively talking about savannas, but we are talking about regions such as Europe, the whole of Europe, or the Eastern United States, or Eastern China, that many think they are a potential forest and that their natural state is a closed canopy forest where you cannot see any grass, where you cannot see any shrub. Well, the evidence from vegetation ecology tells us that these areas have been open landscapes during the last million years. And what do we mean with open landscapes, open ecosystems? Well, we are not meaning that it is just a pasture with scattered trees. It's more complex than that. Usually, as we see in both pictures, one is from Cabañeros National Park in central Spain, and the other is from Masai Mara National Reserve in Kenya, is that the trees concentrate in the slopes and also at the margins of the trees. And then in the plains, where you have most of the grass, you may have scattered trees. Actually, the name Mara in Swahili means spotted, because it's a grassland landscape with spots of trees in it. This means that trees, shrubs, and pasture are coexisting in a dynamic landscape. And who is responsible for that coexistence? Because I have said that these landscapes start about 15 million years ago, and before we did have closed canopy forest everywhere. What we still can see in protected areas, for example, in New Zealand or in the Hawaii Islands and the Canary Islands. But then some animals went out of Africa and started tumbling down trees. Some animals, of which most of them have disappeared by now. Okay, in this diagram, you see the ones in green are the extant species that we can only observe, even if their ecological significance has been greatly reduced because of the ample use of landscapes by humans. But the ones that are shadowed in black are the ones that we drove to extinction during our recent species history. And this may also explain some of the adaptations to carnivore diets that we were reviewing this morning, because we were eating a lot of herbivore and we were eating a lot of big herbivore. This is a more recent publication where you can see the comparison in sizes of the extant species and the extinguished species, both in Australia and in North America. And as you can see, we have basically driven the biggest ones to extinction. And it really coincides with the arrival of Homo sapiens to these places. Probably it was a mixture of climate variations and the presence of humans, whether it was the presence of humans that brought them to the brink of extinction and the climate gave the last touch, or the other way around, is debatable. But the clear argument is that the contribution of humans to this was determinant. But this mean that open ecosystems disappeared in the world? It didn't, because the human influence, this is also a recent paper from PNAS last year, the human influence is to be found everywhere in the world, and more so as the human population actually grows. We can see that most ecosystems have a significant influence of humans in how they are shaped. This is why it shouldn't really make us wonder why we have what are considered cultural landscapes. Here I have chosen two pictures taken by myself in Spain, but you will find that in a lot of places in the world, where these landscapes that are considered cultural landscapes that are maintained by humans look strikingly similar to the landscapes that we consider natural. The ecological base for it and the ecological base of these complex landscapes with a lot of trees, with a lot of shrub, and especially with a lot of grass, rely on some subtle equilibria between these three types of plants that interestingly cause also sharp edges between these three ecosystems. I like this paper because it explains it in a pretty elegant mathematical way, so that when you go to the verge of the rainforest, for example, in Uganda, I do field work in Uganda almost every year in Western Uganda, and you see where the rainforest ends and the savanna starts. You see that it is a hard border, it's not gradual. And it's because of these relationships between the forest trees, the savanna trees, and the grasses and the competitions they are subjected to, the influence of fire, and also the influence of herbivores. I was telling you that a lot of these mega herbivore species disappeared, but fortunately for biodiversity in the world and for ecosystem functionality, indigenous peoples first as hunter-gatherers used fire as a tool to keep these landscapes open so that those plant and insect species that depended on biotopes that were sun-loving, that needed light, could persist. And indigenous hunter-gatherers did that in order to have more prey to hunt, in order to keep the supplies of meat, basically. And later on with the Neolithic, it was pastoralists who came and did pretty much the same, although in a much more managed way. And as a result, up to now, we haven't had great extinctions in small animals, in insects, and in plants, because we have kept the same structure of ecosystems. And this is important because we have a lot of people saying that landscapes should be much more forested. And for most of the continental lands on Earth, this is not really true. We know also that, for example, for climate change, it is really important to keep these open landscapes because they are able to store a lot of carbon, especially underground, which is safer than above ground, and I'll come to that again later. But these are numbers that are relevant and that are important. And now the question that arises when commenting these things is how many herbivores were they and how many herbivores are now? And this is a question that we have tackled recently in a paper that is almost approved for publication, I hope, and maybe in the next week or two. Where we have actually compared the map of Bond, these stripes here, with the biomes in the world. And you can see that the areas that fall into this biome of open ecosystems can be grasslands, it can be temperate forests, some are tropical forests like in India. It seems that we have oversimplified a dynamic reality in ecosystems, which are these ecosystems. But also more importantly, the numbers that you see in the map are places where we have evidence for the natural density of wild herbivores. And in all these places that are marked there, we are having densities of above 10 tons per square kilometer, which is basically a lot, and which is much more than has been assumed previously by some studies. In fact, in this popular science video that we have done, that is in Spanish, but with English subtitles, so you can understand it, we have summarized the work that we have done in this paper, and we can see that from a revision that was done in 2008, that established relatively low numbers of wild mammals. The evidence that has accumulated during the last 14 years shows that the potential number of wild herbivores is much higher than we thought. And that interestingly, it more or less matches the current herbivore, domestic herbivore biomass in the world, which is a ray of hope because it means that we potentially can feed the world through sustainable livestock keeping. As you are also aware, I hope there are better and there are worse ways of keeping livestock. There are more destructive ways and there are more beneficial ways. This is a a publication at FAO that I participated at, where we describe this situation. People again are not very aware of that. People tend to think that livestock is just negative. Fortunately, there were a couple of range ecologies there that changed a little bit the narrative. But very importantly, again, the positive role of livestock has to do with being mobile and with imitating the behavior of wild herbivores. And I know that may sound unpopular, because for some that sounds like a step into the past to return to more mobile forms of livestock keeping. I, however, have to say, because the evidence that is there is really appalling. And it actually also makes sense, because but I mean, there's nothing new here if we consider all the regenerative grazing techniques that imply also imitating this behavior by wild animals. I think we could also be much more innovative in supporting these ways of practicing livestock keeping. Maybe not implying going with the livestock, but maybe sharing livestock between two herders, one upland, one in the lowlands, or something like that. But the thing is that when we analyze mobile pastoralism, it is everywhere in the world. It is adapted both to the ecological circumstances and to the land tenure and social circumstances. And this is what Peter was also saying, that I am a little bit of a multidisciplinary scientist. Sociology and economics is very important to describe these realities. But the thing is that moving livestock around is a trait that can be observed everywhere in the world, because it makes a lot of sense. Now, interestingly, and this was thanks to some of the comments by the reviewers, if we compare the densities of the potential density of wild herbivores with the current densities of domestic herbivores, we see areas where there are many more herbivores domestic than we would expect when comparing with wild herbivores, which are the ones in red. There are areas that are more or less balanced, which are the ones in brown. And there are areas where we have a lot of space for keeping more livestock. I would be careful with Eastern Africa, with the Mopane region in Eastern Africa, because I think thanks to the low presence of livestock there, we have healthy wildlife populations because of all the hunting states there. But look at the whole taiga biome, and I don't know if you have heard about the Pleistocene Park, and about a couple of Russian scientists called Sergei Simov and Nikita Simov that are actually defending that the taiga is nothing but a boreal steppe that has degenerated because of lack of grazing. And this is a really interesting theory. They have very good publications in Science, in Veterinary International, worth being read, definitely. So, that said, I hope by now you have understood that wild herbivores and domestic herbivores can occupy the same ecological niche, and it is positive that they occupy because they maintain a lot of fundamental ecological processes. However, we all know, I think in this room, the accusations against livestock, the great influence in climate change, and especially that it's grazing ruminants that are to blame. And now I want you to retain the important role of livestock in occupying this ecological niche. First of all, for the accountability of nitrous oxide, usually people do not apply the last revision of IPCC that had exaggerated the role of nitrous oxide emissions from grazing livestock into climate change. And this is something important because that's already accepted, that nobody can rebate it, yet it is not being applied systematically in the LCA analysis or in footprint analysis that are done on livestock. But also accusing livestock of contributing to anthropogenic climate change implies that all the methane, all the nitrous oxide emitted by grazing livestock is a net addition to the amount of methane and the amount of nitrous oxide that would be in the system. And we know that, that this is not true because they occupy the niche of wild herbivores. So if we empty that niche, if we withdraw our livestock from these ecological niches, other herbivores, it can be wildebeest, it can be elephants, it can be deer, it can be termites, will move in and will emit methane. And the quantity that methane that they emit is not zero, okay? And this is very important because this is able to reverse all the narrative, the climate change narrative against livestock. We are at the Basque Center for Climate Change, we are starting to do numbers. This is a paper that is currently under revision, where we compare the two elements that I am talking to you about, stationary farms versus transhumance farms. In Spain, you can find transhumance by truck and transhumance by foot still, especially mediated by the fodder prices crisis. And what we saw, first of all, is that transhumance is very productive. It's so productive that it is able to reduce the footprint per product compared to stationary farms, to extensive farms, to grazing farms that will not move. Why? Because the animals live in an internal spring, they are eating high quality food, and they are living longer and having more offspring, so they are more productive. When we see the greenhouse gas profile in the different types, I have also compared here with another paper that gave numbers for intensive livestock keeping. We can see that the profile changes. So the transhuman herds have much more methane and much less carbon dioxide. And if you remember, carbon dioxide is of fossil origin and is the ultimate change, the ultimate cause of climate change since the Industrial Revolution. So what we are seeing here is that the more extensive a production system is, the more towards grazing, and the transhumance is the quintessence of grazing livestock, then the more we are going to reduce carbon dioxide, which is the real problem regarding climate change. Even the intensive farm here is not really completely comparable with the sedentary ones. Otherwise, they would have even more CO2 because they are not fed on concentrate, but on byproducts, which are a little bit. So, and then if we add the baseline element, so if we compare how much these transhuman sheep are emitting and compare it with what the baseline emission in this landscape is, and it is a conservative estimate because we have to take into account that in these landscapes, there can only be deer because we already drove aurochs and bisons to extinction. We can see that the carbon footprint of transhumans is quite below what would be in an intensive farm, not to talk about sedentary farms, because its methane or its greenhouse gas footprint is reduced by almost 30% if we subtract that inevitable baseline. Okay, so we are completely changing our conclusions. Usually, it is perceived that the most grazing livestock a system is, the worse it will be for climate change. We are actually extracting the contrary conclusion. And we have other data, for example, for Africa, that we are also in the process of publishing, where if the herbivore yield is complete, this difference is even less. So that basically when you substitute domestic herbivores by wild herbivores, you're emitting the same methane and the same nitrous oxide per hectare. Now, you may be aware that there are papers in big journals suggesting that we should remove animal sourced food from our landscapes in order basically to fight against climate change and to get a carbon opportunity of fixing livestock in that vegetation. And the first thing that falls into my mind is that when comparing these maps in this paper with Bond's map, basically what they're suggesting is to forest or to a forest open ecosystem, which are the ones that have been shaped and dominated by herbivores. But now, even reading the paper, it's interesting to analyze who wins with that, okay? Because when we think on who needs to compensate emissions, which are oil companies, airlines, and the automobile industry, the paper clearly talks about permissible CO2 emissions. So it's clear that there is a force here behind wanting to afforest rangelands in order to be able to continue making a lot of money out of oil, out of CO2 intensive economic sectors, and it apparently is going to be ruminant livestock that is going to pay for it. So also the scientific basis for that is sketchy, because while it is clear that the carbon stored underground and rangelands are better at that, is going to be kept safe there. There is increasing evidence that the fires that are becoming much more common with climate change mean that the carbon that is stored above ground is not secure and it can burn at any time. But at least has actually done in the last 15 million years, because remember what Bond says, it's the brown and black world. So we should come up with Antoine de Saint-Exupéry and the Little Prince, and remember that we are having a narrative of big trees that are eating our world, and we maybe should start just to fight against them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manzano. So, was there anything there that struck you as news? How about the idea that there's going to be emissions, whether we have wildlife or we have livestock? What about the idea that we can have both? Once again, we're so used to these either or conversations, like we can have crop agriculture without livestock agriculture. These are false dichotomies, and I really appreciated hearing that idea of a brown and black world as opposed to a green world. It took me a second to understand what you were saying by that. And the open landscapes, and this came up earlier. I remember someone years ago saying that human beings are children of the grasslands. But within 30 some years, we're going to be children of the urban landscapes, because 70% of us are going to live in urban areas. And what's that going to mean in all these conversations that are taking place? So I really appreciate your presentation, and thank you for leading us off in this session. And let's also bring forward what we thought about, what we were introduced to this morning. What should we be eating? Well, okay, what can we grow? Okay, and as a speaker later will say, maybe we've had the wrong subjects driving the conversation. You know, agriculture is limited by certain ecological realities in the specific areas that it's being practiced. And whatever we're doing to produce food is going to have an impact. And these systems are very complex, and they don't lend themselves to the simplified statements. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to hear more here. Our next speaker is Dr. Jason Roundtree.